Good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Harshita Thakur, MDS, Oral Medicine and Radiology, and a proud faculty member of Odont Academy of Learning. So today I'll be talking about facial space infection, which occurs in maxilla. Now, this topic is important from undergraduate level as well as postgraduate level, and also for dentists who are appearing for their NEET examination. Now, as UGs and PGs, this question can come as a short essay, or it can be compiled along with mandibular space infection or secondary space infection and come as a long essay question. For NEET aspirants, they can get super confusing and complicated questions. So please do listen to it carefully. Okay, so let's begin with the facial space infections of maxilla. These are the topics that I'll be covering it under. So when it comes to what is facial space infection, what happens is now there is definitely distance between the face and the skeletal structure, the internal skeletal structure. Okay, now this distance is not really covered with a space. Even though it says facial space, the space is actually occupied with a lot of anatomical structures like our muscles. There can be salivary glands, there can be lymph nodes, there can be the vascular elements, the loose connective tissues. Okay, so all of these are our forming different fascias, right? And whenever there is an infection, what it does is it causes the pus accumulation. Basically, it causes the facial layers to separate from each other by filling in the edematous fluid. So because of this ballooning up of the facial spaces or facial structures, we have come to the conclusion of facial space infection. But as such, or normally, there is no void or no space between these structures. Okay. Now, what are the factors that affect the spread of infection? Now, this spread is multifactorial. First and foremost being the microbial factor. So we have our different microorganisms, some are aerobics and some are anaerobics. The odontogenic infection usually starts with aerobic infections. Okay, so once this aerobic infection starts, it will release certain byproducts like streptokinase, collagenase, hyaluronidase. All of these, they basically wither the tissue spaces and they spread deep into the anatomical structures. Okay, and it causes the infection. So the extent of the infection or the severity of the infection is known as the virulence, right? Second is the host defense mechanism. In host defense, now we all know by now that if the patient is immunocompromised, obviously the extent or the severity of the infection would be more, because there are not many WBCs or the other defense factors which are playing a role when compared to a patient who has an optimum level of defense mechanism, right? Third point, which is most important, is the path of least resistance. Okay, so what it basically means is the infection will spread when there is absolutely minimum or no obstruction. Okay, obstruction or resistance. So wherever it is an easy passage to flow, obviously the infection will go and penetrate in that particular area. So here we have three examples. This is of a maxillary molar, wherein we can see that the infection is spreading from the buccal root of the molar. Now, where is it going? It is from the periapical area. It is spreading radially and enroaching the buccal cortical plate, and in future it can form a swelling in the buccal area, okay, or can go into the vestibule. In the second case scenario, the infection is on the palatal root, okay, from the periapical area of the palate. It is enroaching the palatine cortical plate and in future will cause a swelling of the palatal region, forming a palatal abscess. Third case scenario, the same thing, either the floor of the maxillary sinus is slightly apical or maybe the root is slightly superiorly placed, okay, towards the maxillary sinus floor. So what happens in this case is the infection, instead of going palatally, which is the most obvious or way, okay, or going buccally, it has found a easier path of going and breaching the floor of the sinus and forming an infection of the maxillary sinus. So either spreading buccally or palatally or into the nearest anatomic structure, in this case the maxillary sinus, whichever forms the least resistance, is giving least obstruction, that is where the infection will flow. Now, when we talk about primary spaces, what is the meaning of primary space? It is nothing but the source of infection, okay, that is obviously the tooth or the periapical region, okay. The first area where it infects after the tooth is known as the primary space. So in maxilla, we have three primary spaces. One is the canine space, also called as infraorbital. So infra is below the orbit. Okay, so canine or the infraorbital space. Next, we have the buccal space, which is involving the buccinator muscle, as the name suggests. And then we have infratemporal. Again, this means below the temporal bone or the temporalis muscle, right? This is also known as retrozygomatic space infection. Why? Retro means behind and zygoma, okay, behind the zygomatic process. So infratemporal also has another name. Then we come to the secondary spaces. What is the meaning of secondary space? From the primary area, where else can it spread? So the second time when it spreads is known as the secondary space infection. The different types of secondary space infection of maxilla is the temporal space, the parotid space, masticatory space, which is further divided into pterygomandibular, submasseteric, superficial temporal, and deep temporal phase. Okay, so coming to the canine space infection, which is the first primary space infection of maxilla. As you can see in the picture, it is involved coming from the canine, okay, and going up to the infraorbital margin. So for anything, any space infection, we need to know the surgical boundaries. Why is this important? Is, of course, it is important for diagnosing clinically how we can see the swelling and come to a conclusion that this can be the particular facial space infection, can be the cause. Okay. Also, second reason why we should know it, for surgical treatments that we do, like incision and drainage, or if we are trying to aspirate something out to prevent penetration into the anatomical or any other vital structures which are present, we need to know the surgical involvement or the surgical boundaries. Okay, so for canine space, superiorly, we have the superior aliquot nasi, okay, that is superior levator labii superioris aliquot nasi, or levator labii superioris, as well as zygomaticus minor muscle. So these three muscles form the superior border of the canine space infection, which is basically localized to this area. Okay. On the inferior aspect, we have the caninus muscle. It is also called as levator anguli oris. Anteriorly, we have the orbicularis oris muscle, which runs around our circumoral region. And then on the posterior aspect, we have the buccinator muscle. Okay. So the mnemonic for this is block. B stands for buccinator. L is the levator labii superioris as well as aliquinasi. O is orbicularis oris and C is the caninus muscle. So you can try remembering with the help of this mnemonic. So this is another picture which shows the extent of the canine space infection. So here we can see it usually involves the inferior orbital margin up to the upper lip area and anteriorly from the nasolabial fold up to the extent of the buccinator muscle. Now etiology, as the name suggests, it is a canine space infection. So definitely maxillary canine is the offending tooth. Apart from that, also the first and the second premolar can cause the canine space infection. Now, these two teeth will only cause canine space infection if the path of resistance is less on the buccal aspect. Okay, so it will enroach the buccal cortical plate and then it can go up and cause the canine space infection. In case this doesn't happen, there's some sort of resistance, it can find a way into the palate and form a palatal abscess. Apart from maxillary canine and premolar, the other infection which can lead to canine spaces, mesiobuccal root infection of the first molar. So this is quite important from NEET examination point of view. They can give you this to confuse the students, as well as nasal infections, which can lead to the canine space infection. Now we know that canine is the longest tooth in the oral cavity. What happens is, if the root of the canine is long enough to penetrate the levator labii superioris muscle, what happens is, if it is long and crossing or at least enroaching that particular muscle, the infection from the periapical, now it can flow into two courses. One is from the apical region, it can go anteriorly, okay, cause this cross the quadratus muscle and form an infection leading to swelling in the inner corner of the eye. Or it can flow from here, instead of going anteriorly, it can go posteriorly up to the zygomatic area and cause the swelling on the outer corner of the eye. That is this case. Okay, so either way, wherever it flows, it leads to periorbital edema. Okay, so it is because of this spread of the infection from levator labii superioris, either anteriorly or posteriorly, do we see a periorbital edema in canine space infection. Now, in case the root is short, okay, so it can either go into the palate, okay, you can see here the palatal cortex is breached and it has formed a swelling here leading to a palatal abscess, or it can enroach the buccal cortical plate and form a vestibular abscess. Okay. Now, the clinical manifestation, we can see in the photo, there is swelling from the inferior orbital margin, okay, and it is towards the angle of the mouth it is stopping. And here, if you can appreciate, the nasolabial fold is slightly uplifted. So the term here we use is obliteration. Okay, that means it is slightly lifted up. So there is obliteration of the nasolabial fold. And if you can appreciate here again, the angle of the mouth on the right side is quite straight, whereas in this case, it is slightly distended downwards. Okay, so this is called as drooping of the angle of the mouth. Apart from this, over the skin overlying the swelling appears slightly tense and red. And in long-standing cases, it can lead to an extraoral opening called a fistula. Now, the next space, which is called as buccal space. Buccal space, as the name suggests, it is involving the buccinator muscle. So the teeth involved are premolars and molars. So this is the buccal space, okay, here. And the surgical boundaries of this is superiorly we have the zygomaticus major as well as the zygomaticus minor muscle. On the inferior aspect, we have the depressor anguli oris. Okay. Anteriorly, we have the buccinator muscle, which is covered by a buccinator fat pad. If this is anterior, posteriorly, we have the masseter muscle here. Okay. And laterally, we have the platysma muscle. Medially, there is also slightly it is covered by the buccinator muscle. Okay, so these are the surgical boundaries. This is another picture to understand better the buccal space infection. Now, the etiology of it, as already established, is maxillary premolars as well as maxillary molars. Now, what is important in buccal space infection is this, that buccal space infection is a primary space infection of both maxilla as well as the mandibular teeth. Okay, so either this course or the course from maxilla, it can lead to swelling of the buccal fascia. Now, clinically, how is it manifested? Whether it be maxillary or mandibular. Again, the swelling usually starts from the infraorbital margin, okay, extends up to the inferior border of the mandible. And anteriorly, it starts from the angle of the mouth and up to the ramus of the mandible where the masseter muscle is attached to it. The skin again over the swelling is slightly tense and red. Intraorally, we can see a sinus opening, also called as a gumboid. Right? Now, the third and the last primary space of maxilla is the infratemporal space infection. So, infratemporal, as already explained, below the temporal region. So, this is the temporal region, the inferior aspect of it. Coming to the surgical boundaries of this particular infratemporal space, superiorly we have the greater wing of sphenoid here. Okay. Inferiorly, here we have the lateral pterygoid muscle. Then comes anteriorly, it is bound by the posterior surface of maxilla. Posteriorly, we have the styloid process as well as the tympanic plate. Okay. Laterally, we have, of course, the ramus of the mandible. And medially, we have the lateral pterygoid plate. Okay. So these are the surgical boundaries. Coming to the etiology, it is the molar second and the third molar which usually cause the infection if odontogenic in nature. Apart from that, it can also be infection from an unerupted teeth. Now this can be either odontoma or an impacted third molar in the maxillary region. Okay. And the third cause of it can be local anesthesia injection, which has a contaminated needle. And it can also be considered as a secondary space infection, okay, from your deep or superficial temporal space. Now, this is another example. Now, from this maxillary molar, it can go to the and form a buccal space infection, first or second molar, or it can go up. It is in close proximity and involve the intratemporal space, forming an intratemporal abscess. Clinically, now it is in the temporal region, okay? So there will be swelling of the TMJ area and also the skin overlying the ear, okay? And it will spread up to the eye, can cause periorbital edema. Apart from this, it can lead to proptosis or bulging of the eye, and in advanced cases, the patient will not be able to even open the eyes. And intraorally, there can be swelling in the tuberosity area, and it can be associated with limitation in mouth opening. Now that we have done all the three space infection, now there is a common clinical manifestation of any of the facial space infection. That is the cardinal signs of inflammation. First is scalar, that is nothing but warmth or heat. So whenever we palpate the swelling, okay, it will always be slightly raised. The temperature will be slightly raised from the other normal side. Apart from that, in some cases, patient will also complain of fever associated with the swelling. Okay, so that is our calor. Next is rubor, which is nothing but redness. Okay, redness over the overlying skin. Next is tumor. Tumor is nothing but inflammation or swelling basically. So the area which is affected because of pus accumulation is obviously swollen. Next is dolor, which is nothing but pain. So that area on palpation will be tender in most of the cases. And finally, we have loss of function in certain cases, like limitation of mouth opening. Okay, all of these come under limitation or loss of function. Now that we have all the clinical manifestation and the etiology, and clinically also we have described the swelling, what is the next step? Obviously, the investigation before we come to the final diagnosis. So first investigation is hematological investigation. I'm sure all of you are aware of complete blood count, okay? And before doing any surgical procedure, we always advise for bleeding time, clotting time, okay? So all of these are to be kept in under check. The RBC count, WBC count, all of these come under hemat investigation. Second is on the dental chair, we can do radiological investigation to confirm the offending tooth or the odontogenic cause of it. So most common is of course IOPAR or OPG if the patient has limited mouth opening. Now, in case we see IOPR and OPG and realize that there is absolutely no offending tooth, in case we are suspecting a salivary gland infection in terms of maxilla, we can always consider parotid gland infection. Then we can advise the patient for an ultrasound. And in advanced cases, CBCT, CT or MRI can be considered to know the extent of the infection. Now that we have all of the investigation, we'll come to a particular diagnosis, and then the most important aspect is the management. Now, management of facial space infection is divided into three categories. First is the surgical drainage, second is the antibiotic therapy, and third is the medical and basically the supportive therapy. So in surgical management, what comes is incision and drainage. That means we poke a needle and drain out all the contents of the pus. Next is extraction of the offending tooth. Of course, we have to remove the source. So we do extraction. Now, once we drain out the tooth or drain out the pus or extract the tooth, what happens? First is all the toxic purulent material to a certain extent is removed. When that happens, automatically, if you are removing the pus and the toxic contents, the edema or the swelling because of the fluid which was there, the fluid is out, so swelling will automatically reduce. Okay. And third most important point is, now that we have removed all this necrotic and microorganism filled pus, the antibiotics that we prescribe would be absorbed better. So what happens is the treatment would be in a faster, or it will not be very time consuming. Okay, it will be in an optimal level. Second is the supportive therapy that we spoke about. So supportive therapy is, we must always keep the patient hydrated. If patient is unable to eat anything, we can always give saline. Okay. And if the patient is under pain, analgesics or NSAIDs can be given. Antiseptic mouthwashes to keep the intraoral area clean and also prevent any sort of other opportunistic infection. Then keep the patient on liquid diet and preferably a high protein diet, because that will build up the other cells which are lost, and advise the patient a complete bed rest. Now, when it comes to the antibiotic therapy, what happens is, when we are draining out the pus, we always collect the sample and send it for culture sensitivity. The reason why this happens is, we need to know the exact microorganism so that we can prescribe the exact antibiotic. Otherwise, if we give any antibiotic for a longer duration, the chances of patient getting resistant to that particular antibiotic increases. Okay, so just to reduce the risk of resistance to any antibiotic, we always do a cultural sensitivity test, so that it is our treatment is very specific and that particular microorganism based. Okay. And the reason why we give antibiotic therapy is, in case we have not drained out or any sort of residual pus is left with the antibiotic administration, that pus or the microorganism will either dry, or the pus will dry soon. And next is, it will prevent further spread of infections, if any. Okay, so these are the antibiotics. We have narrow spectrum and broad spectrum antibiotics. Now, when do we give a narrow spectrum antibiotic? When the patient's immunity is good, okay, it is not compromised basically, and odontogenic infections which are limited only up to the vestibular spaces. That means it is not very invasive in nature. The infection is limited. Okay, so what we can give is amoxicillin 500 mg thrice daily. In case the patient is allergic, you can always administer clindamycin 300 mg thrice daily, or metronidazole, of course, is the treatment of choice, 400 mg thrice daily. Now, in case the patient is not very healthy, he is immunocompromised, or we have tried and tested these medications and it has not worked before, so we give a broad spectrum antibiotic. Another reason why we give is, if the infection is beyond the vestibular space. Okay, so we can give a combination that is in the form of augmentin, usually amoxicillin and clovenic acid, 625 mg twice daily. Then azithromycin 250 mg twice daily, and ciprofloxacin 500 mg twice daily. Now, all these antibiotics, whichever we give, is usually given for 5 days. Okay, not more than 5 and not less than 5. Again, because of resistance which the patient can acquire. Now, the most common complication of the maxillary space infection, usually in the anterior region, is called as cavernous sinus thrombosis. So cavernous sinus thrombosis is, just give me 1 minute. Okay, cavernous sinus thrombosis is nothing but thrombus formation, which is a clot formation in the cavernous sinus or in the branches of the cavernous sinus. Now, how this infection spread is via two routes. Okay, so this is a picture which just shows the close proximity of cavernous sinus to the facial space. Okay, so the two routes that we were talking about is the external route and an internal route. In an external route, what happens is we have infection, let's say on the nose or the anterior region. It goes via the facial vein. Okay, it goes via facial vein, combines with the angular vein. From the angular vein, it goes and it joins from the superior orbital fissure, it goes and it joins the superior ophthalmic vein. This superior ophthalmic vein has direct connection with the cavernous sinus. So this is how externally the infection from the anterior region of maxilla can spread to the cavernous sinus. When it comes to the internal route, so internal route is usually on the posterior aspect of maxilla. Okay, so we have these maxillary vein and the pterygoid plexus. Okay, so the infection from the maxillary vein via the pterygoid will go to the pterygoid plexus and it will join with the inferior ophthalmic vein. Okay, this inferior ophthalmic vein will again go superiorly via the superior orbital fissure. It will enter and then cause the infection in the cavernous sinus. Okay, so these are the two routes, external and internal route, through which the infection spreads into the cavernous sinus from maxilla. Now, how this happens? First point, what we already discussed is the short distance from the maxilla and the cavernous sinus. The distance is short, so obviously it can easily flow in. Second is we have the pterygoid plexus. So in pterygoid plexus, what happens is there is anastomosis. That means there is interlinking or communication of the veins. Okay, directly from the plexus into the sinus. We have our emissary veins. Okay, so these veins are a direct communication channel which can cause the spread of infection. Second is lack of protective valves. So what happens is, as you can see in this photo, we have valves on the vessels, okay, which prevent the backward flow of the infection or the blood. So in this case, they are all valveless. So there is not unidirectional but bidirectional flow. So basically what it means to say is the infection can flow easily, okay, from to fro and fro to to. Okay, so this causes or this makes the infection more vulnerable to flow into the cavernous sinus. Now, what are the clinical manifestations of cavernous sinus thrombosis? The initial symptoms are, of course, there is a swelling of the face on the affected side. The eyelids get slightly edematous. Okay, when you touch it, palpate the eye which is affected, it will be tender. There is exophthalmos, that is nothing but bulging out of the eye, and there will be multiple retinal hemorrhage. We can see in this photo that this eye is absolutely clear, the cornea. In this case, there is reddish appearance, or it is called as retinal hemorrhage. So these are the initial symptoms. We then have, this is another photo of the retinal hemorrhage and the exophthalmos in this case, leading to closing of the eye because of excessive papillary edema. Okay. Now, in the later stages, this papillary edema becomes bilateral and the patient is unable to open their eyes. Then later on, the advanced stages, there will be toxemia and meningitis. It can lead to stiffness of the neck, and it causes Biot's respiration. That is nothing but rapid, deep breaths with short pauses in between. So this is called as Biot's respiration, which is characteristic of cavernous sinus thrombosis. Now the other two signs, that is positive Kernig sign and Brudzinski sign. In positive Kernig sign, what happens is when we flex, okay, our hip joint, we will not be able to move our legs completely. Okay, so this is a Kernig sign, that is on flexing the thigh, basically the thigh part, we will not be able to extend the leg properly, completely at a 90-degree angle. We can see in this image that from here, patient is not able to erect it completely. Okay, there is some sort of limitation. So this is called as Kernig sign. In Brudzinski sign, what happens is when the patient flexes his neck, you can see here, automatically the legs also get flexed. So this is known as Brudzinski sign. So these two signs are characteristic feature of cavernous sinus thrombosis in the advanced stage. Now, when it comes to treatment of it, of course, we start with antibiotic therapy. The drug of choice is chloramphenicol, which is given intravenously 1 gram 6 hourly. Now, because there is a thrombi or a clot which is formed, we will obviously give an anticoagulant called as heparin, 20,000 units in 1500 ml. Okay, so it prevents the extension of thrombosis. Apart from that, a neurosurgical consultation must be done in the form of MRI or a CT, just to make sure that the infection has not spread deeper, okay, and surgical drainage to remove the excess pus. Okay, so this is it in the primary space infection. Stay tuned for the secondary space infection and the mandibular space infection, which will be uploading shortly. And in case of any doubts or any queries, you can always leave a comment down below. And please do like, share, and subscribe our channel. Thank you so much.